January 4th, 1944. Rain clung to the bamboo groves like a wet skin, dripping steadily onto the winding jungle trail that cut through the mountains north of Imphal. 13-year-old Riku Nakamori crouched beneath a sagging palm leaf, his bare feet sinking into the soaked earth, listening to the distant rumble of Japanese transport engines. He had learnt that sound the same way other boys learnt the voices of their fathers, by heart, by instinct, by the sheer repetition of war grinding through his valley for 2 years. But today, he wasn't hiding for safety. Today, he was waiting. Riku held a long, narrow metal tube across his lap, a scavenged length of a broken British signal mortar casing, dented on one end, polished on the other where he'd filed it smooth against the stones of his village creek. His fingers traced the tool again and again, each motion steady, though his heart hammered like a war drum in his chest. This was the moment he had rehearsed for weeks in secret, while his mother slept, while his older brother rationed rice, while the Japanese patrols grew harsher and more unpredictable. The boy had no rifle, no grenades, no training. What he had was something he discovered by accident in a collapsed supply hut 3 months earlier. A torn British engineer's notebook with half-ruined sketches explaining how sound funnels could distort engine noise, create deceptive echoes, and cause mechanical disruptions when directed at close range toward exposed carburetors. Most adults would have thrown it away. Riku hid it under his mattress and studied it every night by candle stub. By mid-December, with the Japanese collecting food from every household and punishing late payments with beatings in the village square, Riku's anger stopped fitting inside him. He needed to do something, and in the absence of weapons, he built one out of noise. At first the idea felt ridiculous even to him. A metal tube pointed at a truck. What could that possibly do? Yet the notebook insisted that a resonant harmonic pushed into an already strained engine could disrupt its air intake long enough to choke combustion. Riku didn't understand every detail, but he understood desperation. He also understood that Japanese supply trucks on the mountain road ran with open engine bays because the steep gradients overheated them constantly. If he could get close enough and strike the tube at the right angle, the vibration might carry into the engine housing. He practiced for hours on the wrecked British motorcycle the Japanese kept near the checkpoint by the river, striking the metal tube with a wooden peg, listening as the vibrations changed pitch depending on how he held it. Each time the old engine sputtered or coughed from the resonance, he memorized the exact angle. When he finally caused the motorcycle to stall completely for nearly a minute, he knew he had found something that mattered. Now, crouched in the dripping undergrowth, he waited for the convoy he'd been tracking since dawn. The Japanese were pushing deeper toward the frontier, and their trucks carried ammunition, rice, and radio parts, things the Allied scouts in the hills could desperately use. Riku's cousin had whispered that the convoy always slowed at the hairpin turn overlooking the valley gorge. That was where the engine bays were most exposed. That was where he would strike. The boy rose slowly, tightening the cloth binding on his wrist. The engines were louder now. 3 trucks, maybe 4. He moved through the trees on silent feet, weaving between roots and ferns, navigating paths every child in his village learned before they learned the alphabet. Small birds scattered as he passed, but the rain drowned their flutters beneath its constant hiss. By the time Riku reached the ridge, the first truck had appeared, grinding its way up the steep incline. Japanese soldiers clung to the rails, rifles slung over their backs, eyes half closed against the slanting rain. None of them looked toward the trees. Nobody ever did. Why look for danger in the shape of a boy? Riku stepped to the edge of the rocks, holding the tube firmly between both hands. The engine bay was completely open, the fan spinning hard, its belts straining. He waited until the truck slowed at the turn, until the roar softened just slightly. Then he raised the tube, angled it exactly as he had practiced, and struck it hard with the wooden peg. The sound was deep, metallic and sharp, like a bell cracked by lightning. A vibration shot through the air, invisible but heavy. It slammed into the exposed engine with a hollow clatter. The fan wobbled. The belts twitched, The engine hiccuped once, twice, then choked violently and died. The truck lurched to a stop. Soldiers shouted in confusion. One leapt down, pulling a wrench from his belt. Another jumped to the front, waving others to stay back. They yanked open the side panel, muttering curses. They never looked toward Riku. Not once. To them, the jungle had killed the machine, not a child with a metal tube. Riku slipped back into the trees as the second truck approached, its headlights dimmed by the fog rolling through the pass. He sprinted through the brush, heart racing, cutting ahead to a spot where the road narrowed between two jutting boulders. The rain slicked the rocks, making them shine like wet bone. He crouched low. The second truck rounded the bend, engine growling under strain. Riku raised the tube again, fighting the trembling in his hands. If the first success was luck, this would prove the truth. He struck the tube. The resonance leapt out again, stronger this time, carrying through the rain like a vibrating thread. It hit the truck just as it accelerated, the harmonics sliding into the exposed intake with uncanny precision. The engine let out a strange gurgling roar before sputtering into silence. The truck jerked violently, its wheels scraping the rock, sliding crookedly until it slammed into the mountain wall with a muffled crunch. Soldiers tumbled from the back, cursing as they hit the mud. Riku's breath came in sharp gasps. 2. He had done it twice. He darted to a lower ridge before the third truck appeared. This one carried a small mounted gun and a larger crew, men more alert than the first two. They scanned the road, the trees, the fog. One even raised binoculars, sweeping the ridgelines. Riku froze, pressing himself flat against the wet roots, barely daring to breathe. The soldier looked right past him, dismissing the shape of a muddy child as nothing more than another shadow. When the truck slowed to navigate the slippery curve, Riku rose into a crouched stance, lifted the metal tube, and exhaled through his teeth. He struck with all the force he had left. The vibration blasted into the fog, hitting the truck's open engine like a fist. The engine shrieked in protest, gears grinding, belts snapping. The vehicle jolted violently, tires slipping on the soaked road. The driver panicked, overturned the steering wheel, and the entire truck swung sideways, rolling into the drainage slope with a deafening crash. 3 trucks, 3 hits, 3 disabled engines. The jungle went silent except for the rain. Riku scrambled backward, nearly sliding into a ravine, catching himself on a tangled root. His arms shook from adrenaline, and his ears rang from the repeated strikes. He had not expected all 3 to fall. He had not expected the Japanese to completely lose their supply line for the day. Shouts erupted all along the road. Soldiers argued, pointed, climbed over each other in confusion. Some fired blindly into the trees, bullets snapping vines and leaves, but none came close to where Riku hid. The boy crawled deeper into the undergrowth until he reached a hollow beneath a fallen log. There he curled up, clutching the tube to his chest, listening as the Japanese attempted to restart their ruined convoy. They would never guess. They would never understand. Even if they recovered the trucks, they would not realize that a boy armed with nothing but a battered metal tube had crippled their progress up the mountain. But someone else would understand, because high above the valley, on a moss-covered ridge overlooking the road, an Allied reconnaissance scout had watched the entire thing through binoculars. He saw the boy step out. He saw the strikes. He saw the impossible results. And he knew that whatever that child had discovered could change the balance on this front. And he knew he had to find him. Riku, unaware he had been seen, slipped further into the forest shadows, clutching the weapon no one believed could work. Until today. Night fell over the valley like a slow descent of ink, swallowing the ridges and river bends until only the faint glimmer of lanterns on the broken Japanese trucks marked the road. Riku Nakamori had not moved from his hiding place beneath the fallen log for nearly an hour, waiting for the shouting to fade, waiting for the soldiers' bootsteps to scatter in frustration. He could still hear them hammering at engine parts, slamming hoods, cursing the rain, pounding tools against metal as if anger alone could undo what the vibrations had destroyed. But he also knew that sooner or later they would spread into the jungle to search for saboteurs. And they wouldn't imagine a boy did this. but they might not care. Anyone they found might be punished for the humiliation of 3 stalled trucks. Riku eased out from under the log, clutching the metal tube that still vibrated faintly from the last strike. His wrist hurt, his arms felt heavy. But he knew he needed to move deeper into the mountains before dawn. His village lay only 2 kilometers away, and he couldn't risk leading angry Japanese soldiers toward it. His mother expected him home before midnight. She would search for him if he failed to return, and if she searched, she might be seen. He forced himself to walk, navigating between the massive tree trunks slick with moss, letting the rain mask the sound of his feet. The storm clouds drifted apart just enough for a pale moon to slide into the sky, illuminating narrow strips of forest floor. Frogs croaked. Nightbirds fluttered in the dark canopy. The jungle did not know a boy had just struck a blow against an army. The jungle didn't care, but Riku cared, and every step he took now felt different, heavier, as if carrying a secret too large for a child's shoulders. A branch cracked behind him. He spun, nearly dropping the metal tube, heart slamming against his ribs. But instead of a Japanese soldier stepping into view, a man in soaked British fatigues emerged quietly from the shadows. He held no weapon, only a pair of binoculars around his neck and a small canvas satchel slung across his chest. His beard was overgrown, his uniform patched, his boots smeared with mud. He looked like someone who had been living in the jungle for weeks. Riku backed away, raising the tube like a club. The man raised both hands slowly, palms open. "It's all right," he whispered in halting Japanese. "I saw what you did. I'm not your enemy." His accent was rough but understandable. Riku didn't lower the tube, but his grip loosened. The man stepped closer, just enough for the moonlight to catch his face, angular, tired but alert. He had the eyes of someone who watched everything, someone used to danger. "My name is Sergeant William Hart," he said softly. "Chindeep Patrol. We've been tracking those trucks for 3 days." He pointed toward the ravine where the engines had fallen silent. "And you stopped them." Riku swallowed hard. His throat felt tight. He did not speak. Hart reached into his satchel slowly and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it, revealing a hard biscuit and a small tin of condensed milk. He extended both toward Riku. "You look hungry," Hart murmured. "Take these, please." Riku hesitated, searching for a trap, but the smell of the biscuit hit him like a wave. His stomach twisted painfully. He edged forward, snatched the food, retreated again, and devoured the biscuit in 3 quick bites, barely chewing. The condensed milk he opened carefully, licking it from his fingers, savouring the rare sweetness. Hart watched him with a sombre expression, as if weighing a question before speaking again. "How did you do it?" he whispered. "That metal tube. Is it yours?" Riku clutched it against his chest and nodded. Hart crouched so they were eye level. "I saw men twice my age try to sabotage engines with explosives and fail. Yet you, one boy, shut down 3 trucks without touching them." He glanced toward the trees, lowering his voice further. "The Japanese will search this ridge soon. They'll be angry. They'll want answers." He paused. "You can't go back to your village. Not tonight." Riku's breathing hitched. "My mother," he whispered. "I know," Hart answered gently. "We'll find a way to warn her. But first, we need to move. My unit is nearby. You'll be safe with them. You have my word." Riku looked into his eyes and saw something he hadn't expected. Respect, not pity, not amusement. Respect for a child holding a scratched metal tube. Lightning flashed far beyond the ridge, followed by a distant roll of thunder. Hart touched Riku's shoulder lightly. "Come on," he murmured, "before they find your tracks." Riku followed. They moved silently through the forest, Hart guiding him across slippery slopes and narrow ridges until they reached a hidden trail Riku had never noticed. The jungle thinned into a small clearing where 2 men in British uniforms crouched behind a camouflage net. They rose when Hart signalled, a Burmese scout and another Chindit soldier, both tense but curious. This is the boy, Hart whispered. The one who stopped the convoy. The Burmese scout stepped forward, eyes wide. Impossible, he muttered. He is too small. Hart shook his head. I saw it. He gestured toward Riku's hands. And that is his weapon. The scout examined the tube skeptically. It is only scrap metal. Riku raised it instinctively, defending himself. Hart smiled faintly. It's more than that. Much more. He turned to the others. Pack up. We move before dawn. The patrol extinguished their small stove, gathered their equipment, and slipped into the trees again. Riku followed them through narrow ravines and across shallow riverbeds, each step pulling him farther from his village. Hours passed. He didn't speak. Neither did the patrol. Only Hart occasionally checked that Riku was close behind. By the time the sky above the canopy shifted from black to deep blue, they had reached a ridge overlooking the valley. Below them, smoke still curled from the third overturned truck. Japanese soldiers paced angrily around the wreckage, arguing, shouting orders, firing their rifles into the underbrush out of sheer frustration. Hart crouched beside Riku. They'll spend all day fixing that mess, which gives us time to talk. Riku gazed at the smoke, unsure whether to feel pride or fear. Hart set the binoculars down and spoke gently. Riku, the thing you did tonight, it wasn't luck. It wasn't magic. It was engineering. Proper engineering. He tapped the metal tube. That's a resonant disruptor. Crude, but brilliant. Where did you learn to build it? Riku hesitated, then whispered, Notebook. British. Engineer's book. Torn. In old hut. Hart blinked in surprise. You read that? Every night, Riku said softly. Hart let out a breath of disbelief. You understood enough to make this? Enough to aim sound into an engine under stress? He shook his head slowly. You have no idea how valuable that knowledge is. The Burmese scout approached quietly. Sergeant, we cannot stay in one place too long. Patrols sweep these ridges. Hart nodded and stood. We'll move soon. He rested a hand on Riku's shoulder. But first, will you show me how you did it? How you held the tube? How you struck it? Riku hesitated, then raised the tube, repositioning his hands exactly as he had practiced at the secret creek behind his village. Hart leaned in, studying each angle, each placement, nodding slowly as realization spread across his face. Tuned vibration, he murmured. Directional resonance. And you found it by yourself, God above. He rubbed his jaw. Command needs to know about this. Riku looked down at the ground. Am I in trouble? Hart knelt to face him again. No. You may have just saved my patrol's lives, and maybe more than that. He stood. We're taking you to our forward camp. They'll keep you safe. Will I go home? The boy asked quietly. Hart's face softened. We'll find a way. But not yet. You're too important now. Riku lowered his gaze. He didn't feel important. He felt cold, hungry, scared. But he nodded. The patrol moved east along upper ridgelines, climbing higher toward the Allied positions hidden deep in the mountains. By midday, the rain eased into a mist, leaving the air heavy and still. The sun broke through in scattered beams, lighting the mossy stones and trembling spider webs. Riku felt the warmth on his skin for the first time since nightfall. They stopped briefly to drink from a clear stream. Hart handed Riku another biscuit from his pack. You've been quiet, the sergeant murmured. I'm thinking of my mother, Riku whispered. Hart's voice was gentle but firm. We'll send a message through the local runners. She'll know you're alive. Riku nodded, but anxiety still knotted his chest. As they moved again, the forest around them shifted. The air grew cooler. A distant rumble echoed from the southeast. Artillery, faint but unmistakable. Hart stopped, listening. They've begun their push, he said quietly. The Japanese? Riku asked. Hart shook his head. Us. By late afternoon, they reached a narrow gorge crossed by an old rope bridge. The planks were warped, the ropes frayed, but Hart tested it carefully and motioned for the others to move. Riku crossed last, gripping the ropes tightly as the wind swayed the bridge over a dizzying drop. Hart followed behind him, steadying the ropes whenever they jolted. On the far side, a sharp whistle sounded from the trees. Riku jerked in alarm, but Hart held up a hand. From behind a cluster of moss-covered rocks, a group of men emerged. Allied soldiers in worn uniforms, rifles slung over their backs, eyes alert. Their leader, a tall captain with a narrow face, stepped forward. "Hart," he said, "you're late." "We had an unexpected advantage," Hart replied, stepping aside to reveal Riku. The captain stared. "A child?" Hart shook his head. "A strategist, a saboteur, and possibly the only reason the Japanese convoy to the eastern ridge never arrived." Riku lowered his eyes, shy under the scrutiny. The captain circled him slowly, examining the metal tube. "What is that?" Hart explained everything, not quickly, not casually, but with the precision of someone who understood the importance of each detail. The captain listened without interrupting, his expression hardening into something contemplative. When Hart finished, the captain turned to Riku. "You did this?" Riku nodded. "And you can do it again?" Riku hesitated. "If engine is open, if angle is right." The captain folded his arms. "We have reports of another convoy coming through the northern pass tomorrow, larger, heavily guarded. If we can delay it, our forces can break their supply line completely." Hart spoke quietly. "He's just a boy." The captain didn't look away from Riku. "Boys grow up fast in war." Then his voice softened, not gentle, but understanding. "But we won't force him." Riku felt the weight of every eye on him. He didn't want to be a weapon. He wanted to go home. He wanted dinner with his mother, the smell of boiling millet, the sound of his brother's voice humming near the fire. But he also remembered the Japanese patrols dragging villagers into the square. He remembered the fear, the hunger, the helplessness, and he remembered the moment the first truck engine choked into silence. He lifted the tube and nodded once. "I will help." Hart closed his eyes briefly, not in disappointment, but in solemn acceptance. "Then we start at dawn," the captain said. The patrol moved deeper into the hidden camp, where tents blended into the jungle and radios crackled softly beneath tarps. Riku sat near a small cooking fire, warming his hands, listening to the murmur of soldiers planning tomorrow's mission. Some spoke of air support, others discussed the terrain, but one thing came up again and again. The boy, the tube, the impossible weapon. Hart sat beside him, handing him a cup of warm broth. "You're brave," the sergeant murmured. Riku stared into the steam. "I'm scared." Hart nodded. "Good. Only fools aren't." He placed a hand on Riku's shoulder. "Sleep. Tomorrow will be hard." Riku lay on a bedroll beneath a tarp, cradling the metal tube against his chest, listening as the jungle hummed with night sounds. He wondered where his mother was, whether she was pacing the village streets, calling his name, whether soldiers had come asking questions. He closed his eyes and whispered into the darkness, "Please, let her be safe." Rain began again, light and steady. And somewhere beyond the mountains, Japanese engines were already warming, preparing to travel the same deadly road Riku intended to silence. Dawn crept into the jungle on pale legs, sliding through the mist that hovered between the tall teak trees. The air was cold enough that Riku could see his breath when he exhaled, and the ground seemed to tremble with distant engine growls long before the sun reached the tops of the mountains. He tightened his grip on the metal tube, its surface slick with humidity, and stood beside Sergeant Hart on a narrow ridge overlooking the northern pass. Below them, far beyond the tangled vines and steep ravines, a thin dirt road carved through the valley like a scar. It was wider than the one Riku had targeted the night before, with better visibility, meaning more Japanese eyes, more rifles, more danger. But it was also exposed, and that was what Hart needed. That was what the boy could use. The captain crouched beside them, binoculars in hand. Scouts report 6 trucks, 1 armored car, 2 motorcycle outriders. They'll reach this stretch within the hour. He exhaled. They're not taking any chances today. Riku swallowed hard. His heartbeat felt like a trapped bird fluttering against his ribs. You don't have to step directly onto the road this time, Hart murmured. We only need 1 truck disabled, 1 delay. The others will bottleneck behind it. Riku understood. 1 engine failure in the narrow pass could stall an entire supply chain for a day, maybe longer. If the Allied forces were already pushing from the southeast, that delay could mean victory on a front line he had never seen. But what if he missed? What if the tube didn't resonate the same way? What if the Japanese spotted him? Hart knelt in the wet grass and lowered his voice until it was barely above a breath. Listen to me, Riku. You're not alone today. My men will take positions along the ridges. If anything goes wrong, they'll cover you. You only strike once. Then you run straight back to me. Riku nodded slowly, his throat tight. The Burmese scout appeared from between the trees, carrying a bundle of fresh-cut bamboo poles, each sharpened at one end. He placed them quietly on the ground. For after the strike, the scout said. If the convoy panics and tries to back up, we will block their path. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Hart muttered. Riku crouched at the edge of the ridge, closing his eyes, breathing through the rising tremble in his hands. The sound of the approaching engines grew louder, steady, disciplined. These drivers were not tired, they were not careless, they were alert. He thought of his mother stirring rice over the fire. He thought of Japanese boots on village floors. He thought of fear. When he opened his eyes again, the mist had thinned just enough to reveal the road clearly. A motorcycle appeared first, the outrider leaning forward beneath his steel helmet, scanning the foliage with sharp eyes hardened by years of ambushes. Riku froze, every muscle tightening. The rider passed beneath him, never looking up. A minute later, the first truck appeared, larger than the ones before, with reinforced panels and a crew packed tight inside. Its hood was open for cooling, but the angle was narrower, the engine partially shielded by metal braces. Riku adjusted his grip on the tube. He slid down the ridge slowly, silently, his bare feet digging into the earth, palms gripping wet roots to steady his descent. Once he reached the halfway point, he stopped behind a knot of exposed roots that jutted from the slope like gnarled fingers. This was the point of no return. Hart watched from above, breath held. The truck slowed as it reached the steepest incline. The engine roared, hot air rising from within the housing. The open section revealed the pulsing fan, the spinning belts, the vibrating metal frame. Riku knew the exact moment to strike. He felt it more than he saw it. The trembling shift in the engine, the slight deepening of the growl, the tightening of the belts. He raised the tube. He angled it carefully. He struck. The vibration rolled down the ridge like a thunder pulse. It hit the engine bay with a metallic shudder, echoing into the machine's inner cavity. The driver jerked upright. Soldiers shouted. The engine sputtered once, twice, then choked into silence. The truck lurched forward, then stalled completely across the narrow road. For a breathless second, Riku thought he had succeeded perfectly. Then everything exploded into motion. The second truck slammed on its brakes just in time, tires skidding on the mud. The third swerved sharply, nearly toppling into the ravine. Soldiers leapt from the backs of the vehicles, rifles raised, shouting at one another as they scrambled to understand what had happened. The armoured car revved loudly, its turret swinging toward the ridge where Riku had been standing seconds earlier. "Run!" Hart's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Riku bolted uphill, slipping on the wet earth, clawing his way upward as bullets snapped into the bark around him. A shout went up behind him, Japanese voices, angry, commanding. He scrambled over a slick root, nearly losing the tube, then hurled himself behind a fallen tree as a burst of gunfire chewed into the foliage where he'd been a heartbeat earlier. Hart appeared out of the mist, grabbed Riku by the arm, and pulled him to his feet. "Move!" he hissed. "Go!" They ran together along the ridge as Japanese soldiers fanned out below, searching for the source of the sabotage. The captain's team provided covering fire, short, precise bursts designed not to kill but to confuse, to stall pursuit, to make the enemy think they were surrounded. But the Japanese were disciplined. They did not retreat. They did not panic. They pressed forward in a tight formation, climbing the ridge fast. The Burmese scout threw 2 bamboo stakes down the slope, blocking the path just long enough for Hart and Riku to reach the narrow rope bridge. The captain met them there. "They saw him," he said quickly. "We have to move west. They'll follow." Riku panted, legs burning, lungs tight. Did it work?" Hart turned him toward the valley. The convoy was stranded. The first truck remained stalled sideways across the road. The second formed a useless blockade behind it. The armoured car sat at an awkward angle, unable to push forward without risking a slide into the ravine. Japanese soldiers were pulling at wires, hammering the metal framing, shouting at one another. Smoke rose from the first engine, thin and blue. "It worked," Hart whispered. "You did it again." But the boy didn't feel triumph now. He felt hunted. The patrol moved fast over the rope bridge, not looking back. The captain cut the rear rope as the last soldier crossed, sending the bridge collapsing into the gorge below. Riku stared at it, shaken. "Now we can't go back." Hart rested a steadying hand on his shoulder. "We weren't going back that way anyway." They trekked westward through rising mist for an hour, then another. The sound of Japanese pursuit faded. The forest opened briefly into a shallow glade where sunlight touched the ground in small, trembling circles. Here the men paused, catching their breath. Riku sat on a flat stone, staring at the metal tube in his lap. He felt older than he had the day before. Not taller, not stronger, just older, as if a piece of childhood had been stripped from him by the weight of the morning. Hart joined him quietly. "Riku!" The boy didn't look up. "You saved the entire left flank today," the sergeant said softly. "Your disruption gives our forces at least 12 hours, maybe more." Riku hugged the tube to his chest. "But now my village, they will search it. They will think someone helped me." Hart's jaw tightened. "We'll send word ahead. The local scouts can warn your mother. They can hide her if necessary. I promise you, we won't leave her unprotected." Riku blinked hard, fighting the sting behind his eyes. The captain approached them. "Hart, the boy comes with us to base. Command needs to hear what he knows." Riku flinched at the word base. It sounded far, final, like he was being taken away forever. Hart crouched beside him. "You won't be a prisoner," he said gently. "You'll be valued and safe and trained properly if you choose." Riku stared at the tube. "I didn't mean to be someone important." Hart smiled faintly. Most important people didn't. They continued west, reaching the Allied forward base by late afternoon. Camouflaged tents stretched across the slopes. Radios crackled. Medics moved between wounded soldiers brought down from the front lines. The moment the patrol entered camp, dozens of eyes turned to Riku, curious, confused, astonished. Word had spread before he arrived. The boy who disabled 3 trucks. The boy with the metal tube. The boy who bought the Allies a strategic window. A British engineer approached almost immediately, staring at the tube with fascination. "Is this it? The resonance device?" He reached for it carefully. "May I examine?" Riku jerked it away instinctively. Hart stepped between them. "Gently, John. It's still his." The engineer raised his palms. "Right. Of course. Apologies." The captain led Riku toward the command tent. Inside, a large map covered the central table, pins marking troop movements, supply lines, enemy fortifications. A colonel with silver hair and deep lines around his eyes studied Riku, as if evaluating a new piece of artillery. "So," the colonel said quietly, "you're the reason the northern convoy is stuck." Riku said nothing. Hart spoke for him. "Sir, the boy understands the principles of harmonic resonance in a way I've never seen. He reproduced the effect twice under controlled conditions and twice under active pursuit. His intuition is uncanny." The colonel clasped his hands behind his back. "We may have stumbled upon something far more significant than a lucky strike." He nodded at Riku. "Son, would you be willing to show my engineers how you use that tube?" Riku looked down at the metal cylinder, then up at the colonel, then finally at Hart. The sergeant gave him a slow, reassuring nod. "Yes," Riku whispered. The engineers gathered outside, forming a half-circle around an old generator placed on wooden blocks. Riku positioned himself exactly as he had in the forest, feet steady, tube angled slightly downward. He struck it. The vibration hummed through the camp, a deep resonance that made the wooden table legs tremble. The generator sputtered, it coughed, it stalled instantly. The engineers gasped. One knelt, touching the machine casing. The frequency. Incredible. Another whispered, "If we refine this, direct it, miniaturize it." The colonel silenced them with a gesture. "One step at a time." That night, Riku ate more than he had in weeks. Warm rice, a small piece of salted fish, broth thickened with herbs. He slept beneath a canvas roof for the first time since the war began. He dreamed not of engines or trucks or metal tubes, but of his village, quiet beneath the moonlight, his mother's soft voice calling him inside. Morning brought new decisions. The colonel summoned him again. "We've confirmed it. Your method works, but we want to build something safer for you to use. Something that doesn't require striking metal with your bare hands." He leaned forward. "Riku, you have a gift. The question is, what do you want to do with it?" Riku did not know how to answer. War had never given him choices before. But he knew one thing. "I want to go home," he whispered. "But I want my village to be free." Hart placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll help you do both." In the days that followed, Riku remained with the engineers, teaching them everything he had discovered on his own. They built new prototypes, hollow tubes, reinforced casings, frequency-guided channels. Riku tested each one, correcting their angles, adjusting pitch, refining their understanding with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned through desperation, not textbooks. News arrived soon that the Allies had advanced across the eastern ridge unopposed. The Japanese reinforcements had never arrived in time, a turning point in the local front, all because of one boy, one metal tube, one idea no adult believed until they saw it themselves. Weeks later, when the Japanese presence thinned and Allied forces secured the valley, Riku walked back into his village accompanied by Hart and 2 Burmese scouts. His mother spotted him first, running barefoot through the dusty street, tears streaming from her face as she pulled him into her arms with a force that nearly knocked the breath from him. He held her tightly, burying his face into her shoulder, the metal tube warm in his hand. Behind them, Hart watched with a tired smile. "You're safe now," his mother whispered. "You're safe." But Riku knew, deep down, that the war had changed him forever, that what he carried was no longer just metal, but knowledge, and knowledge could be powerful, dangerous, necessary. And though he returned to the quiet rhythms of village life, the sound of vibrating metal, sharp, resonant, impossible, would follow him always, echoing across memory like the first spark of courage that rose inside a boy on a rainy mountainside. The spark that disabled 3 trucks. The spark that stalled an army. The spark nobody believed, until they saw what a kid with a metal tube could truly do.